The water should have killed me that day, but his hands pulled me from the current like I was something precious. I believed in his calloused fingers, his weathered smile, the way he said my name like a prayer. 3 months of stolen kisses and whispered promises until the bank manager's words shattered everything I thought I knew. "You own half this town, miss." The cowboy who saved me had known all along. Subscribe to discover how love and lies collide in the untamed West. The Clearwater River ran wild that spring morning, swollen with mountain snow and winter's rage. I had come to the bank to think, to escape the suffocating walls of the boarding house where I'd been staying since arriving in Millbrook. The telegram from my father's lawyer still crumpled in my dress pocket, its words burning through the fabric like acid. "Come immediately. Inheritance matters require your presence." I had no idea what inheritance he meant, no idea that my life was about to change forever. The rushing water seemed to call to me, promising answers in its depths, or perhaps just an end to the questions that plagued my sleepless nights. My foot slipped on the wet stones, and suddenly the world tilted sideways. The current seized me like hungry hands, dragging me under before I could even scream. Water filled my lungs, my vision blurred, and I felt myself being pulled toward the deeper channels where the river claimed its victims. This is how I die, I thought, alone and forgotten in a town where nobody knows my name. The cold numbed my limbs, made my dress heavy as iron chains, and I stopped fighting. Sometimes surrender feels like the only honest choice left when everything else has been stripped away. Then strong arms wrapped around my waist, hauling me upward toward the light. I broke the surface, gasping, choking, alive against all odds. Through the water streaming from my eyes, I saw him clearly for the first time. Sun-weathered skin, eyes the color of storm clouds, dark hair plastered to his forehead. He was beautiful in the way that broken things can be beautiful, scarred and real, and utterly present in that moment. His hands were gentle as he pulled me to shore, his voice low and soothing as he whispered that I was safe now, that everything would be all right. He wrapped his coat around my shivering shoulders, and I breathed in the scent of leather and sage and something indefinably masculine. "Jake Morrison," he told me, tipping his hat with old-world courtesy. "I'm Elizabeth," I whispered back, my voice still raw from the river water. He smiled then, a slow curve of lips that made my heart stutter in ways that had nothing to do with my near drowning. There was something in his eyes, a recognition that went deeper than our brief introduction, but I was too shaken to question it then. All I knew was that this stranger had saved my life, and I was grateful beyond words. We walked back to town in comfortable silence, his coat still draped over my shoulders like a promise. He left me at the boarding house with instructions to rest, to drink hot tea, to take care of myself. As I watched him ride away, something shifted inside my chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the blanket Mrs. Henderson wrapped around me. I didn't know then that Jake Morrison had been waiting for me to arrive in Millbrook, that my near drowning had been the perfect opportunity he'd been hoping for. Love and deception often wear the same face in the beginning. That night, as I lay in my narrow bed listening to the wind rattle the windows, I touched my lips and wondered what it would feel like to kiss the man who had pulled me from the river's embrace. I had no way of knowing that he was wondering the same thing, or that he already knew secrets about my life that I hadn't discovered yet. Sometimes the most dangerous rescues are the ones that feel like salvation. Jake Morrison appeared at my door the next morning with wildflowers and a concerned expression that made my pulse quicken. He wanted to make sure I was recovering properly, he said, but his eyes lingered on my face in ways that suggested deeper motivations. I invited him in for coffee, and we sat at the small table by the window, talking about everything and nothing while the morning light painted golden squares across the worn wooden floor. He told me about his ranch outside town, about the horses he trained and the land he loved. I told him about my life back east, about the loneliness that had driven me to accept my father's lawyer's mysterious summons. What I didn't tell him was how his presence filled the empty spaces inside me that I'd carried for so long. There was something magnetic about Jake Morrison, something that drew me in despite every rational thought screaming warnings. He had a way of listening that made me feel heard, really heard, for the first time in years. When he laughed at my stories, the sound was rich and genuine, and when he looked at me, I felt beautiful in ways I'd forgotten were possible. We talked until the sun was high overhead, and when he finally left, he promised to return the next day. And he did return, every day for weeks, bringing small gifts and easy conversation that gradually deepened into something more intimate. We walked along the river where he'd saved me, and he showed me the safe places to cross, the hidden pools where the water ran clear and calm. His hands were always gentle when he helped me over the rough spots, but I began to notice the way his fingers lingered on mine, the way his breath caught when I stood too close. The attraction between us was undeniable, electric, dangerous in its intensity. One evening, as we sat on a fallen log, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of fire, he reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. The simple gesture sent shivers down my spine, and when I looked up at him, I saw my own desire reflected in his storm-grey eyes. "Elizabeth," he whispered, and my name on his lips sounded like a prayer, like a promise, like everything I'd been searching for without knowing it. When he kissed me, soft and tentative at first, then deeper as I responded, the world seemed to tilt on its axis once again. We began meeting in secret after that, stolen moments that felt precious and forbidden. He would find excuses to come to town, and I would find reasons to walk past his usual haunts. We kissed in shadowed doorways and held hands beneath the stars, building a romance that felt both inevitable and impossible. I was falling in love with Jake Morrison, falling hard and fast and completely, and I believed with every fiber of my being that he was falling too. The way he looked at me, touched me, whispered my name in the darkness, all of it felt real and true and lasting. But love built on secrets has foundations made of sand, and I was about to discover just how unstable the ground beneath my feet really was. Every kiss we shared, every promise we made, every moment of connection we built was shadowed by truths I couldn't see coming. Sometimes the most beautiful lies are the ones we tell ourselves about the people we love. 3 months passed like a dream, wrapped in golden light and whispered promises. Jake and I had fallen into a rhythm of stolen meetings and secret touches that felt as natural as breathing. He knew the exact spot on my neck that made me gasp when he kissed it, and I knew the way his eyes darkened when I said his name. We talked about the future in careful, hopeful terms, dancing around the obvious truth that we were both thinking about forever. I had never felt so alive, so desired, so completely understood by another human being. But there were moments when I caught him watching me, with an expression I couldn't quite read, something that looked almost like guilt flickering across his features, before he smiled and pulled me close. Sometimes he would ask strange questions about my family, about my father's business dealings, about things I knew nothing about. When I told him I'd grown up believing we had very little money, that my father had worked as a clerk in a dry goods store, Jake's jaw would tighten in a way that made me wonder what he was thinking. I dismissed these moments as curiosity, as the natural desire to know everything about the woman he was falling in love with. The lawyer's office sat on Main Street like a monument to secrets, its windows reflecting the afternoon sun in ways that made it impossible to see inside. I had been putting off the appointment for months, too caught up in my romance with Jake to deal with whatever inheritance matters had brought me to Millbrook in the first place. But the lawyer, Mr. Whitman, had been sending increasingly urgent messages, and I finally decided it was time to face whatever my father had left behind. I told Jake I would be busy that afternoon, kissing him goodbye with no idea that everything was about to change. Mr. Whitman was a thin, nervous man with wire-rimmed spectacles and ink-stained fingers. He shuffled through papers with the air of someone who had been dreading this conversation for months. "Miss Elizabeth," he began, his voice carefully neutral, I'm afraid there are some things about your father's life that you were never told. He had been living under an assumed name back east, you see, hiding from some rather complicated business dealings here in Millbrook. The truth is, your father was one of the founding partners of this town, and his death has left you with considerable assets. The words hit me like physical blows, each revelation more shocking than the last. My father, the quiet store clerk who had raised me alone after my mother's death, had been living a lie for my entire life. He had owned property, businesses, investments that I had never known existed. According to the papers, Mr. Whitman spread across his desk, I was now the owner of half the commercial buildings in Millbrook, including the bank, the general store, and most of the residential lots. I was, in the lawyer's careful words, one of the wealthiest women in the territory. As I sat there trying to process this information, trying to understand how my entire life had been built on deception, one terrible thought began to take shape in my mind. Jake Morrison, the cowboy who had saved me from the river, who had courted me so carefully and completely, lived in this town. He would have known about my father's holdings, would have known exactly who I was from the moment he pulled me from the water. The rescue that had felt like fate now seemed like something else entirely, something calculated and cold and utterly devastating. I walked out of that office feeling like I was drowning all over again, but this time there was no one to save me from the current pulling me under. The man I loved, the man I had given my heart to completely, had been lying to me from the very beginning. Every kiss, every whispered endearment, every moment of connection we had shared was now tainted with the possibility that it had all been an elaborate deception designed to secure my fortune. I didn't go home immediately after leaving the lawyer's office. Instead, I walked the streets of Millbrook with new eyes, seeing my inheritance everywhere I looked. The bakery where Jake had bought me sweet rolls on Sunday mornings belonged to me. The dress shop where I had admired the blue silk in the window was mine. Even the boarding house where I had been paying rent was property I owned without knowing it. Every building, every business, every corner of this town that had become precious to me because of Jake was actually mine by right of birth and blood and my father's hidden legacy. The weight of wealth felt heavier than I had ever imagined it could. People nodded to me on the street with a deference I had attributed to small-town politeness, but now I understood it was the respect accorded to money and power. Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house had been treating me like a favored guest rather than a paying customer, and now I knew why. The entire town had been watching me, waiting to see what I would do with my inheritance, while I remained blissfully ignorant of my own circumstances. But it was the thought of Jake that made my chest feel like it was caving in on itself. Had he known from the beginning? Had he been watching me struggle with the river current, waiting for the perfect moment to play the hero? The timing seemed too convenient now, too perfectly orchestrated to be mere chance. A wealthy heiress arrives in town, nearly drowns, and is rescued by a charming cowboy who proceeds to sweep her off her feet. It read like a dime novel plot, and I had been naive enough to believe it was real love. I found myself standing outside the saloon, where Jake sometimes went for a drink after our evening walks. Through the bat-wing doors, I could hear men's voices, laughter, the clink of glasses and coins. Part of me wanted to march inside and confront him immediately, to demand the truth about his motivations and his feelings. But another part of me, the part that was still desperately in love despite everything, wanted to give him a chance to explain. Maybe there was an innocent explanation. Maybe I was wrong about his deception. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of our courtship with this new knowledge coloring my memories. The way he had appeared so quickly at the river, as if he had been watching. The questions about my family that had seemed like natural curiosity, but now felt like fishing for information. The careful way he had courted me, never pushing too hard, never demanding too much, as if he were following some predetermined plan. Even his kisses, which had felt so spontaneous and passionate, now seemed calculated to keep me interested without compromising my virtue. By morning, I had made my decision. I would confront Jake Morrison directly, give him the opportunity to tell me the truth about what he knew and when he knew it. If he had been honest with me from the beginning, if he had fallen in love with me despite knowing about my inheritance, then perhaps we could find a way forward together. But if he had been playing a long game, using my loneliness and gratitude to secure access to my fortune, then I would have to find the strength to walk away from the only man I had ever truly loved. The thought of losing him felt like dying, but the thought of being loved for my money rather than myself felt even worse. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing the simple blue dress he had always admired, and prepared to discover whether the man who had saved my life had also been planning to destroy it. I found Jake at his ranch just after sunrise, working with a young stallion in the corral behind his modest house. He looked up when he heard my approach, and his face lit up with the smile that had been melting my heart for months. "Elizabeth," he called out, dropping the lead rope and walking toward me with that easy, confident stride that had always made my pulse quicken. "You're up early, sweetheart. Is everything all right?" The endearment that had once made me feel cherished now felt like another lie, another carefully chosen word designed to keep me under his spell. I didn't return his smile, didn't move into his arms when he reached for me. Instead, I stood perfectly still and watched his expression change as he registered my mood. "We need to talk, Jake," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "About my father's inheritance, about what you knew, and when you knew it, about whether anything between us has been real." His face went pale beneath his tan, and I saw the exact moment when he realized that his carefully constructed deception had finally crumbled. The guilt I had glimpsed in fleeting moments was now written clearly across his features. He tried to explain, stumbling over words that came too late to matter. He had known about my inheritance from the beginning, he admitted, had been watching for my arrival, because the whole town had been curious about the mysterious heiress. But he swore that his feelings for me were real, that what had started as curiosity had become genuine love. The rescue at the river had been pure chance, he insisted, though he couldn't deny that he had used the opportunity to get close to me. Every word he spoke felt like another betrayal, another confirmation that the man I loved had never really existed. I listened to his explanations, his apologies, his desperate attempts to convince me that his love was authentic, despite the deception that had birthed it. But how could I believe him now? How could I trust any emotion from a man who had been lying to me for months? When he reached for my hands, I stepped back, and I saw something die in his eyes. "Elizabeth, please," he whispered, and my name on his lips no longer sounded like a prayer, but like a plea from a drowning man. "I love you. That has to count for something. But love built on lies is not love at all. It's manipulation dressed in prettier clothes." I told him that I couldn't distinguish between his genuine feelings and his calculated actions, that I would never be able to trust him again. The pain in his eyes looked real, but then again, everything about him had looked real until today. I turned to walk away, and he called after me, his voice breaking on my name. I didn't look back, though every step away from him felt like tearing pieces of my own heart out and leaving them scattered in the dust. As I rode back to town, I realized that I was truly alone now, in a way I had never been before. The inheritance that should have been a blessing felt like a curse. The wealth that should have brought security had instead brought betrayal. I owned half of Millbrook, but I had lost the only thing that had ever made me feel at home there. The cowboy who had saved me from drowning had instead taught me that sometimes the most dangerous currents are the ones that look like rescue, and that the deepest wounds are inflicted by the hands we trust to heal us.